You're listening to episode 78 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. If you are new to the show, welcome. If you've been here since day one, thanks for hopping on the show again this week. So this week's show is all about the foods, the nutrients, and the dietary supplements that support a healthy immune system. So, what does the science say about vitamin D and zinc and vitamins A, C, and E? Why is a diet rich in fruits and veggies more important now than ever as we deal with this global pandemic? Why are the elderly at greater risk for nutrient deficiencies? And why will you never hear me make the claim that anything can boost your immune system? It's an overstatement. We'll get into that on the show. So my guest this week is Anthony Thomas, Ph.D. He is nutrition researcher and director of scientific affairs at Jarrow Formulas in Los Angeles. And you might remember Anthony from last year's two-part series on probiotics. And you can still listen to that series. And you know what I'll do? I'll put a link in the show notes from today's show that'll take you to that two-part series we did last year with Anthony. So as part of Anthony's job at Jarrow, he manages scientific research as it relates to product formulations. And yes, he is an avid user of dietary supplements. But as you will hear from Anthony, diet and physical activity come first. So I interviewed Anthony back in April when here in New England, we were deep into quarantine. I don't know what took me so long to get this interview up, but it's been busy, right? We've all been very busy being at home. Things have loosened up here since April, certainly, but in parts of the U.S., now they're dealing with this spread of COVID-19. So the topic of immunity and diet, it is still so timely. It is still supremely important. So I know you're going to love this episode. A few friendly reminders. It's summer, and if your kids are not able to attend in-person camps, don't forget about my 26-day Color, Cook, Learn Cooking and Coloring Challenge. This will keep them busy. It's a free challenge, and if you sign up every day for 26 days, you and your family will receive a free foodie-themed alphabet coloring page. So A is for avocados, B is for blueberries, and so forth. You'll get links to recipes featuring the letter of the day and a Cooking with Kids tip. The challenge, guaranteed to keep the entire family busy. So I hope you'll check it out over at lizshealthytable.com under the cookbooks and freebies page. If you enjoy the show, I always like to remind you this, tell a friend about it, write a review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to check out the show notes from today's show. I'm going to provide links to the resources, the science, and the supplements that we talk about on the show. And now, my interview with Anthony. Hey, Anthony, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you again, Liz.
Well, since we last spoke, your life has changed. Well, obviously, you're home because you live in California, and many of us are sheltering at home now, but your family has grown since we last spoke. So just tell everybody, bring us up to speed on what's happening in your household.
That's right. My daughter was born just before midnight on January 25th, and that was just before things really started taking off here in the U.S. with our surreal situation with this viral pandemic. So a silver lining for me, because I've been working from home most of that time, is that I've had a lot of quality time with my daughter in these early months of her life. In fact, she's 3 months old today. The sad thing is, though, she hasn't got to meet much of her family, and not in person. So hopefully she'll get to meet them soon. I know everyone's eager to meet her, and it's a joy being home with her and seeing her during this time. Yeah, I think we'd all like to get out of the house a little bit too.
I hear you. I hear you. It all makes sense. So I wanted to have you back on the podcast to talk about a topic that's interesting and really timely, and that is immunity. So can we, rather than getting specific with this particular question, I just want to know from you, I just want you to put like diet and immunity into perspective. Can certain foods and nutrients, quote unquote, boost our immune system? Or is that word boost an overstatement?
So I wouldn't use the term boost, although in certain contexts, yeah, people might interpret it that way. I'd like to think of maybe prime or reinforce immune functions. But remember, nutrition and micronutrients that are essential, these are required by our body, including our immune cells, to function properly. And so whenever you don't have adequate nutrient status, which many people don't, then you may have dysfunction in the system. Whereas if you have adequate status, maybe certain things in higher amounts can provide some reinforcement. But in reality, for an otherwise, that's generally during an immune response, right? And so in an otherwise healthy person that is not dealing with an infection or an immune challenge, I would say that taking excessively high amounts of various micronutrients in the context of adequate status is probably not going to do a whole lot for most people.
So we can't like quote unquote turbocharge it beyond just that healthy baseline. And when you talk about micronutrients, can you just tell people what you're talking about? Or you like a macronutrient would be protein, carbs, fat. A micronutrient like vitamin D, calcium, et cetera. Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly. Your B vitamins and vitamin C, your water-soluble vitamins, your fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. And then, of course, your essential minerals, calcium, magnesium, and trace minerals like iron, zinc. These are all essential to cellular functions and thus very important to immune cells, particularly during an immune response. So if I could just broadly characterize an immune response as you have immune cells that are responding to an insult or challenge. They have to replicate and multiply these cells. They have to produce vast amounts of protein and those macronutrients that you mentioned, fat, protein, carbohydrate. Those are not only energy substrates, but we're literally made of that, including our cells. Membranes and cellular components are comprised of these things. So you need a lot of these energy substrates. You need a lot of these building blocks so that these cells can multiply and perform their essential functions. And so you can imagine if any of those things are in short supply, be it essential nutrients, building blocks such as protein, you will have a response that's dysfunctional or not as optimal as it would be.
You had said to me earlier before we started to roll tape for the interview that if you eat a lousy diet, but you take a multivitamin, you're still eating a lousy diet. So the goal is really not to eat that lousy diet so that we get all those nutrients we need. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I'm not going to take credit for the quote, but I think I read the quote and it was from a nutrition professional. I forget what magazine I was reading. It was a while ago, but it was something like, a crappy diet with a multivitamin is still a crappy diet. And as somebody that works for a dietary supplement company, full disclosure, people would think, hey, this guy must be pushing vitamin and micronutrient supplementation. And I wouldn't say I push it. I see the value in it as a tool to help. Right. And sometimes that tool can be more useful than other times. And really, people should think about ensuring adequate micronutrient exposure. And, I'm with you and most dietitians. I think a food first approach is great, but I also see the reality that many people just don't get those nutrients, so they don't eat that balanced diet. We all advocate for it, but when I see data suggesting, most Americans, or at least a substantial number of Americans, eat less than a serving of vegetables a day, maybe one serving of fruit. They don't meet recommended intake levels for dairy consumption, grain consumption, and people think about the macronutrients. I know everyone's always obsessed with, how much fat and carbohydrates, but in reality, these foods are also sources of those essential micronutrients, those vitamins and minerals that your cells need to function properly and for metabolism to function properly, for your immune system to function properly. It's more than just energy metabolism and body weight that we all seem to be very focused on. So when you're not getting enough dairy in your diet, I'm not saying you have to, there's ways to get around it, but dairy is the best source in the American diet of calcium. And so it's not surprising to me that a substantial number of Americans don't get enough calcium in their diet. It's also a good source of protein, magnesium, and all these other nutrients that we don't think about. So we're thinking about the calories, but we're not thinking about all these essential micronutrients. And in reality, a lot of the recommendations as far as dietary patterns that we should follow, they're not really meant to expose us to a certain number of fat, protein, carbohydrates as much as it is to make sure that you're likely getting sufficient exposure and intake of all these essential micronutrients so that your body has these essential tools that it needs to function properly, including the immune system.
So the immune system, which is really what I want to focus on here, we know we need a healthy diet, but let's also not forget about sleep and physical activity and the impact of stress. So it's really not just diet in a vacuum. There's so many other lifestyle factors that contribute to a healthy immune system. And I assume I'm correct in saying that.
You are 100% correct. And I think the other day I was talking to a colleague who, he's been under a lot of stress and he's not sleeping particularly well. I myself struggle with sleep. And I just told him, I said, there's no supplement out there that's going to do better for your health and immune system than getting a good night's sleep, likely, and helping reduce stress. Stress will literally impair your immune system and suppress it, leaving you more susceptible to infection, actually. So, controlling stress and sleep is so important for so many things. I can't emphasize that enough. People think of it's a dietary supplement, but it also functions as a hormone in your body, and that's melatonin. And I did research related to melatonin prior to joining the company I'm now with. And melatonin is important for so many things in health. People think about it just in the context of sleep, but it's so important at regulating metabolic functions in your body. And it's very important for supporting immune function as well. And so you can imagine if you're not getting enough sleep and, we're staying up late, we're exposing ourselves to all this artificial light at night, which we never used to be exposed to, historically speaking. This will suppress melatonin production throughout the evening and therefore can impact your metabolic function and health.
So many things are coming into play. I want to talk about COVID-19, coronavirus, because when the pandemic first hit, there was so much talk about eat this food to boost your immune system and do that to boost your immune system, as though to say, if your immune system is on overdrive and ramped up and ready, that you're not going to get coronavirus or, you're not going to get sick from it. And that is such an overstatement. So I really want to understand from you just that role of a healthy baseline immune system. Does it help us, quote unquote, not get sick if we get infected? Or does that healthy immune system prepare us for the battle if we do get sick and we do get symptoms? So can you put that in perspective?
Yeah, I would agree with the latter statement you made. So it basically helps, give the immune system what it needs to fight the infection and thereby, limit the damage it can do. And then also I would remind people that, a lot of the symptoms you experience when you're sick, it's not necessarily a direct result of the infection. It's a result of your immune response, the inflammatory response to that infection. And if your immune response is not balanced, and you have excessive inflammation that's uncontrolled, well, this can lead to damage and dysfunction in the body. And so, all of these nutrients play a very important role in I don't want, you shouldn't think about it like a light switch, on and off, as if you just can dump these nutrients into the system and all of a sudden, like you mentioned, these cells are kind of, super powered and better at fighting off the infection. When in reality, nutrient inadequacies, deficiencies, those usually take weeks to months to correct, and you can dump a lot of it into the system. And I like to remind people, just because you put it in your mouth doesn't mean it gets into the body. And so there's all these other factors that can contribute to your micronutrient status that impacts how your immune system functions. So, you want to make sure that you have these nutrients coming into the system on a regular basis. And it doesn't need to be, in excess, but just making sure that it's there. And that way your system has what it needs. And then, of course, if you're sick, there's, some evidence that, maybe taking a little extra vitamin C can maybe reduce the severity and duration of that cold. But, I wouldn't say that you need to go out and take, gram quantities of vitamin C in an otherwise healthy person, because one, you're not going to absorb all that. And B, what you do absorb, you're going to likely eliminate most of that from your body. So, you want to make sure that you have enough. If it's safe, then, having a little bit extra just is making sure that you're getting saturating levels. But, really going beyond that, it's not as if you're gonna just really supercharge these cells or anything like that.
Yeah, and we're going to get more into specifics in a few minutes. But before we do, something popped into my head because you're saying, you could be a person who suddenly starts, taking a certain nutrient supplement, let's say, but it doesn't mean your body's going to utilize that nutrient or metabolize it such that, you get some benefit from it. So it gets me thinking about the people who are having that worst reaction to coronavirus, which is our elderly, which is our citizens who suffer from obesity, which are people who have diabetes. And what is it about being older or suffering from obesity that might be impacting a person's immune system so that they're not ready for the assault of this virus?
Right. That is a great question because, and I'm not going to say that it is necessarily a result of micronutrient deficiencies, but certainly what you just described are populations we know tend to have higher rates of micronutrient deficiencies, right? We know the elderly, very high percentages, particularly those living in community homes where we know COVID-19 has just caused so much damage in that context, and that these people have reduced immune function and generally deficiencies in one or more nutrients. And this may be a result of not getting enough from the diet, but also they may not be absorbing enough from what they're consuming. Elderly tend to be indoors more and less mobile. So certain nutrients that we know are important for immune health, such as vitamin D, which is very important for respiratory infections, right? Well, I always tell people, I think vitamin is a misnomer for D. And that's because the primary way for you to build up your vitamin D status is through sun exposure, right? And so if you're not going outside, particularly during hours of the day in which UVB rays are strongest, so that's generally between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And of course, this is affected by what season it is. So, people might say, hey, when do colds typically afflict people more? And that's in the winter, right? And this is when people tend to be, one, indoors more. So they're in closer contact. They may turn on the heater because it's colder, which takes humidity out of the air. And that actually can make it more easily, like a viral respiratory infection, more easily transmitted. But also, you're not in the sun. And so people's vitamin D status often dips during the winter, particularly in certain areas. And you're just not going to get enough from the diet naturally because it's really not found in many foods. I mean, maybe some fatty fish. I don't think many people are consuming cod liver oil unless they're literally supplementing. Right? Yeah, I don't. No. And honestly, it's fortified into milk, but most people, or not most people, but a lot of people are drinking less milk. Dairy consumption is down in the population.
Right, you talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but even then you're only getting, maybe 100, 200 IU of vitamin D, and that's just not enough. That's just not going to move the needle based on what most experts think. And so when you see all that coming into play, and then you put that in the context of an elderly person that their skin production of vitamin D in response to sun exposure is already diminished. Their ability to absorb vitamin D from the diet is already diminished. So they already have hurdles to overcome. And
so that's interesting about vitamin D and the elderly. I've heard that elderly folks tend to be deficient in zinc, and that you need zinc, this mineral zinc, to have a healthy immune system. So what's that connection?
Right. So, I mean, the elderly, they're just a special population because they tend to have lots of micronutrient inadequacies and or deficiencies. And zinc is a problem one because a lot of elderly may not get enough zinc in their diet. It tends to be rich in certain animal foods, meat and oysters, things like that. And then also, as we age, I've read, stomach acid production goes down. And this is very important for helping digest nutrients in food and helping release bound nutrients like minerals that are often bound to proteins in those animal foods I just mentioned so that your body can absorb them. And so we find that the elderly, unfortunately, tend not to have good status of various micronutrients. And of course, we know their immune function is often compromised because of that. And so zinc is so critical to immune function. It's so important for cells that are multiplying. And of course, I said when you have an immune response, those cells need to multiply to mount a defense and then also produce a lot of proteins and chemicals to facilitate their functions. And zinc is important in all aspects of immunity. And so if you don't have enough zinc, then you're very likely going to have a diminished immune response, and you're going to be more susceptible to infection or severity of that infection.
Yeah. And I will say that zinc is in meat, it's in shellfish, it's in legumes, seeds, nuts, dairy, eggs, whole grains. And, if you even look at the elderly population who might have issues with their teeth, it's hard to chew meat. My dad loves a hamburger, that's easier to chew. And in fact, when this whole coronavirus thing kicked in, I said to Simon, my 21-year-old, I said, I think we're going to eat a little more meat moving forward. And Tim doesn't. He's a pescatarian, my husband. But this is where red meat plays such an important role in our diets because it's so rich in zinc. So I just want to give red meat a shout out, for people. I had a very interesting question, which came in from, let me put my glasses on here. This came in from Linda, one of my listeners. And this is such an important question. She says, is eating healthy to support immunity an all or nothing prospect? In other words, can I eat clean, healthy all week, but then ruin any benefits made because I then eat junk food on, say, a Friday night? Like, can you eat healthy all week, but then that one Friday night meal is going to blow it for you? So she just wants you to put that in perspective when it comes to diet and immunity.
Thankfully, I would say no for just the short answer to that question is no, because that's really about ensuring adequate intake and status and having what I'd like to call a weekend diet, which I like to do myself. You kind of start to let yourself have a little more treats and things that maybe you don't have throughout the week, and maybe they're not as healthy for you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will result in depleting zinc from your body. And so I think I mentioned a little earlier, it actually takes quite some time. It doesn't happen overnight. If you're deficient in a nutrient, it will take time to replete your body status, generally weeks, if not months. Whereas also to become deficient or have an inadequate status, that doesn't happen overnight either. That generally takes some time. So it's very unlikely that, if you have a poorer diet, a day or two a week, but you're really doing a good job otherwise, that it would lead to inadequate nutrient status.
So eat your healthy diet, tons of fruits and veggies and your lean meats and your nuts and your seeds and all that good stuff. And then if you kind of blow it on a Friday night, it's not going to ruin your efforts from the whole week. So that is good to know. But I do think sort of living on a junk food diet is definitely not a good idea. So we want to start to eat healthfully, and hopefully everybody listening is already on the healthy eating bandwagon. But I did want you to talk about people who are dealing with obesity. And we are hearing that they're more at risk for having a poor outcome from this virus. And is it similar with the elderly? You mentioned how they are challenged with vitamin D and challenged with zinc. What nutrient challenges would somebody suffering from obesity experience?
Well, honestly, some of the same. So many obese have higher rates of vitamin D inadequacy and zinc inadequacy. And some of that might be directly related to body fatness, where, vitamin D is a fat-soluble nutrient. However, I actually was participating in research that looked at this, where they actually saw that vitamin D can be non-specifically kind of sequestered into fat tissue when you have a lot. So the thought is maybe people that have a lot of excess body fat might need more exposure to vitamin D to have an adequate status, because they're more likely to have compromised status.
What role does protein play in a healthy immune system?
Well, we should just remind everyone that, there's fat, there's protein, and carbohydrates. Those are your basic macronutrients, right? Well, guess what? The body can make fat. The body can make carbohydrates to some extent. However, there's certain amino acids, and these are the building blocks of protein, that your body can't make. And other ones, while it can make them, some it can't make enough of under certain context, or if it doesn't have enough of an essential one, like a building block for that other one. And so protein, remember we were saying that during an immune response, these cells multiply. They have to produce all these signaling molecules and antibodies. Well, all these things are made of proteins too. So there's a high demand for protein during an immune response. And if you're not getting enough protein in the diet, this can severely restrict an immune response. And granted, in developed countries like the US, protein energy malnutrition is not something that's very common, but you want to make sure you're getting enough high quality, quote unquote, complete proteins, which mean it has sufficient quantities of those essential amino acids. Those are the ones that your body can't produce. And then maybe certain other ones that will become what they call conditionally essential, meaning your body can make it, but your body might not have the capacity to make enough, say, during an immune response. So something like arginine is an amino acid that's important and it's used during immune responses. So at that point, even though your body might be able to make some, it might not be able to make enough. And so you want to make sure that you're getting enough from the diet to fully support your body's needs during that time. So protein is a really important one for supporting an immune response.
So we always hear about eating fruits and vegetables, and we know fruits and vegetables are rich in vitamins A and vitamin C, A and C. So how do A and C impact the immune system?
Also very critical nutrients. And of course, it's no surprise that when, data suggests that most people don't eat anywhere near enough fruits and vegetables, that vitamins A and C are two nutrients that are underconsumed in the American diet, along with some other ones. So, vitamin C, it's actually concentrated into many immune cells, like against a concentration gradient. So like levels in immune cells are 50 to 100 times higher than just in your blood circulation. And there's a reason for that, because vitamin C is very important at supporting immune function. Now, vitamin A, people think about it for being important for vision, right? But in reality, most cells of your body have these receptors that respond to a certain metabolite of vitamin A called retinoic acid, and it regulates literally expression of genes and the production of various proteins and cellular components. So very critical to supporting immune functions. And it's also critical for supporting the integrity of the skin barrier and the mucosal surfaces such as your gut and respiratory tract. And again, that's your first line of defense against, insults like infections. They need to breach that barrier. And so without adequate vitamin A, those barriers are compromised. And then, of course, your immune system functionality is compromised if you're not getting enough vitamin A.
I would say that nutrition right now is more important than ever for people. And it's something I want people to be mindful of throughout the year, because this helps us, deal with the common cold and the flu and stomach bugs and you name it. So good nutrition is so important. I'm thinking about vitamin E, which you'll find in, vegetable oils and nuts and seeds, green leafies, hooray. So why is vitamin E important for a healthy immune system?
Yeah, vitamin E is another one of those nutrients that most people don't get enough of. In fact, I have a statistic that says over 75% of the population doesn't consume the average requirement for vitamin E. So over 75% of Americans are not getting the average intake recommendation. And again, average may not even be sufficient to optimally support immune function. And vitamin E, we think about it as being this antioxidant, but it's also fat soluble, right? Vitamin C has antioxidant activities, but it's water soluble. Well, those two nutrients actually interact within the body, and they can help the antioxidant functions of the other one by supporting each other's activities. And so remember, I was saying how important vitamin C is to immune cell function, and during an immune response, vitamin C levels can be rapidly depleted in an immune cell. So one, you want to make sure you have enough vitamin C, but vitamin E also can collaborate and work with vitamin C in the body to support its functions. And also you want to protect the cell against damage. Vitamin E can help do that.
Wow. So they're working together. I love this. That's why, taking sort of these single nutrient supplements isn't always the way to go. Rather, having everything in adequate amounts, right? Okay. Probiotics. You've been on my podcast to talk about probiotics, those bacteria, good bacteria that have been shown to have a health benefit. Do probiotics play a role in immune function? I know that you need them to train your immune system from, when you're born and onward, but on an ongoing basis, how do healthy or good bacteria play a role in immune function?
Right. So again, these microbes, they're all over us and on us, right? We're just covered in microbes. And the principal site of interaction with microbes for our bodies is our gut, our gastrointestinal tract. And that's because the surface area is so high and there's just so many of them there. And of course, you hear this other statistic about, 70 to 75% of your immune system being concentrated in your gut, right? Now, if you think about it, there's a reason for that, right? Because that's where you're encountering many of these microbes, not just bacteria, but viruses, funguses, they're all there. And so the immune system has to know, which guys are not a problem, which guys are a problem. And of course, remember I said there's a barrier, right? I like to remind people that your gut is not inside your body, but it's a selective barrier to inside your body. So it lets certain things in, like various nutrients we need, like these micronutrients. It tries to pull some of those out so that it can be absorbed into your body. But all those microbes that are there, well, those guys aren't supposed to get into the body. And it doesn't matter if you think they're good or bad. Now, probiotics being ingested often in the diet, these are microbes, and they can interact with various cells of your gut, including immune cells and various receptors. And this can modify the functionality of those cells. So remember, I said one of the terms I like is priming rather than boosting. Well, sometimes what this does is it kind of can prime your immune system so that it's ready. Should it encounter someone that's not a nice guy like a probiotic, but maybe a bad guy, then it's going to be ready to act, And it's not for all probiotics too. I just want to remind people that beyond general just digestive and gut health, the benefits of probiotics are thought to be strain specific. So certain probiotics, there's many strains out there that have scientific evidence to suggest that they will support immune functions and help some of these other aspects of immune health, that those are specific to very certain strains of probiotics. So you want to make sure you're looking at products that you're using and don't think that just any probiotic out there is going to suffice and satisfy that function. But in general, microbes, they like to compete. Remember I said that barrier function, a lot of probiotics will reinforce that intestinal barrier function and discourage other bad microbes from being able to cause problems in the system, so to say.
Okay, good. Okay, moving on. Wow, this is a lot. It always gets back to good nutrition, of course, right?
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are talking about, I'm like you, I like to talk about just sort of this overall healthy diet. But then you hear all this buzz about things like turmeric and garlic and ginger. And these are so-called, food supplements, whatever, to consume to, make your immune system stronger. Is there any science to that? Or should we just be focusing more on that big picture healthy diet rather than kind of getting caught up in the weeds, like, should I be adding more garlic to my recipes and more ginger? Or is that maybe a little bit of a false promise, if you will?
So just like with any of those things, there is some truth to it, and there's definitely some evidence to support. There's some aspects, compounds in garlic that can have antiviral activity and antimicrobial activity. Ginger can reinforce that barrier function. It can stimulate stomach acid production, which helps kill off potential pathogens that we ingest on a regular basis every day. And so there is some truth, but I want to remind people, so something like, a probiotic or any of these things that might, reinforce intestinal barrier or various other aspects of the body's defenses and immune functions. Well, those are going to be limited in how effective they can be if your underlying nutrient status. Remember, I was saying vitamin A is critical to mucosal integrity and that barrier function. Zinc is important to that. Well, guess what? If you take these other things that are supposed to help that and you don't have adequate vitamin A and zinc, well, then they're going to be limited in how effective they can be, because your body absolutely needs those essential micronutrients to perform the functions, right? And so when you take these other things that are kind of, have value, but their value, I would say, is going to be limited if your nutritional status is compromised. So again, like you said, it really comes back to a quality, healthy diet.
I love that. It's putting it in perspective. So the turmeric, the garlic, the ginger, that's like the icing on the cake. And we want to make sure the cake has all of those important vitamins, minerals, all those nutrients, those micronutrients, and the macronutrients like the protein. So that's our icing, which leads me to a question from Nicole, another podcast listener. And this just came in this morning. So tell me what you think about this question. She says that she's got a question about supplements. She says, we have some elderberry and mushroom supplements that are meant for immune support. Does it matter how consistent we are about taking them? And does it matter if we switch back and forth between supplements? Should we wait until we feel sick or take them every day? She wants to get a better understanding for these supplements. And I have been reading about elderberry, and I have heard that mushrooms are good for immunity. Maybe because sometimes mushrooms do have vitamin D. But can you answer her question?
Well, I can try to give a little bit of insight from what I do know, and that mushrooms and certain yeasts, they have something called beta-glucans. And so this is a very popular, because they're components of fungi, that they can interact with various receptors on immune cells. And remember, I was saying some of that priming function. So beta-glucans can have some of these priming functions, but not all beta-glucans. So one's from mushrooms, specific types, certain types from yeast, but you may hear that there's beta-glucans in oat, and this may be good for helping lower cholesterol, but they don't necessarily support, at least directly, immune function. So yes, there's some truth to that. To be honest, I don't know a ton about elderberry, so maybe you have some good insight there. But I have read that there is some aspects of it functionally, some antioxidant function, some direct antiviral effects of elderberry that sounds like it could be very beneficial to take, particularly during periods of stress where your immune system might be compromised. Remember, we were saying that stress can suppress immune function, be it you're not sleeping enough, be it emotional stress or physical stress, right? Exercise is good for you, but too much, or if you exercise for too long, that can actually have some negative effects, at least in the short term, on immune function. So, you were saying winter's a time where you might be more susceptible to a respiratory infection. So taking elderberry as a prophylactic, maybe to just help ensure if it has some antiviral effects, well, maybe that's good. But to be honest, I don't know enough about elderberry to really make strong recommendations on it. But it does sound like there is some evidence to support its use. And I don't know that you'd need to take it throughout the year to ensure that your immune system functions well. But certainly during periods where you might be under more stress or more susceptible to infection, it can help. Again, if you're ensuring that your underlying micronutrient status is well.
Right. We can't just grab 20 supplements and think it's going to be a magic pill when our baseline diet isn't even giving us what we need. And I also like this perspective of certain times of year when you feel like you might be more vulnerable, which actually leads me to my question about vitamin D. I want to get back to vitamin D because it seems to have a really powerful role in supporting a healthy immune system. But in the winter, here in New England, it's dark all the time. We don't get outside. It's freezing. So we take vitamin D. And we've been taking vitamin D3, 2,000 IUs a day. And Tim, Simon, we just take it every single day. I figured, why not? We're out and about. Today's sunny. Ooh, that's kind of rare. We haven't seen the sun in a while. It's been a cold, rainy month. But what supplements, if you do consider taking a supplement, I don't take a lot of supplements, but probiotics is one that we take, not every day, but we try to take those. And vitamin D, definitely take that every single day. So are there certain supplements in certain situations where we might want to take a supplement?
Absolutely. And again, I work for a dietary supplement company, but that's not the rationale for my answer. I always like to think of things as a cost to benefit analysis, a little bit. If you think about pharmaceuticals, and I'm not trying to draw an analogy between pharmaceuticals, but most pharmaceutical interventions have their pros and cons, right? And you work with your healthcare provider to understand what the cons are. But if you feel that the pros outweigh the cons for your specific situation, well, then you would go forward with using the medication. And again, it's not without certain risks. Now, many nutrients carry much lower risks, right? And so I like to think of the cost to benefit analysis. So you brought up vitamin D. Now, look, most people, because of the way we live our lives now, we're indoors more. When we are outdoors, we're covered up, right? Or we put on sunscreen. We're not always out when UVB radiation is strongest. And that, of course, is what provokes vitamin D supplementation. But as you mentioned, it's affected by season. You're indoors more. It's cold. You're in Maine. It's affected by latitude and all these other things, skin pigmentation, right? I think I read a statistic, and this was from an old population survey, but something like over 40% of Americans, this is the entire population, have inadequate vitamin D status, right? And even within of those 40% of Americans, certain groups such as African Americans, more than 80% have inadequate vitamin D status. And you mentioned that it's disproportionately affecting people of the African American community when you mentioned COVID. Now, I'm not saying that's because of vitamin D, but we know that vitamin D is very important for immune function, and it's particularly important for respiratory infections. So when you start to think, I wonder, now, what is the risk of taking vitamin D? Well, there's very little risk, actually, particularly if you're using a modest amount. And I should acknowledge that you said 2,000 IU, right? That is the recommendation from the Endocrine Society. So this is a professional society of scientists that understand the biology and function of vitamin D. And they know that the current recommendation of something like 600 IU is just not enough. And you're not getting it from the diet very likely. And if you're not going outside and producing it, you're just not getting enough. So this is the beauty of where supplementation can really just help fill that gap and help safeguard against inadequate status. And when you see how prevalent vitamin D inadequacy or deficiency is in a population such as the US, you start to think, well, why wouldn't you supplement? Because it's cheap, it's effective, and it's very low risk. And I would argue against anyone that starts to tell you about all these risks of vitamin D. I would point to plenty of evidence that suggests otherwise.
Right, right. And so that's the kind of nutrient supplement you might want to take every day, all year long, just as a reassurance. Maybe not in the summer if you're out in the sunshine, but that's kind of a good baseline supplement. What about zinc, let's say? I said to my mom, my mom and dad are in their late 80s. They're doing vitamin D and they eat quite a bit of red meat. So I feel like they're probably okay on zinc. And she wasn't quite sure if she was taking zinc or not. But is zinc one of those other nutrient supplements you think people should consider? And if so, any caveats about zinc?
Yeah, so I can tell you what I do because I think this is a good approach. And I do eat meat, so I think I'd probably get enough in my diet. I'm someone that consumes a lot of grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, and there's certain compounds in those food items that can actually impair zinc absorption. So, to help, I like to take a modest amount of zinc. So I have a supplement from my own company. It's called Zinc Balance, and it only provides 15 milligrams of zinc, and it's a certain type of zinc called monomethionine, which is well absorbed. And then it also provides copper, just about a milligram of copper. And the reason for that is, one is if you take really high amounts of zinc, supplemental zinc, you'd have to probably take, and I'm talking like 40, 50 milligrams plus on a regular basis, this can actually lead to a copper deficiency. So that is the one thing I'd be concerned with. And also copper and zinc actually function together in some aspects to support immune function. So it's good to make sure that you have both. And what I like to do, and this is just on an ongoing basis, this isn't to boost quote unquote immune function. But every other day, I like to take one on an empty stomach, about an hour removed from eating. So prior to having a meal, I like to take my zinc on an empty stomach. That way, these other factors that might interfere with absorption are not present. And, I'll be honest, right now, just because it's like, hey, you know what? It was cold season. We're dealing with a viral pandemic. Just to make sure, like, hey, a little extra is probably not going to hurt as long as I'm not being excessive. So I've been taking my zinc every day. But on average, I think that I do get plenty from the diet. So I like to just, again, safeguard by supplementing a modest amount to just reinforce that's unlikely to cause any problems as far as excess. It's not very expensive, and people have to again, they have to say, if they see it as being too expensive, maybe they can do it every other day or something like that. They have to weigh the cost to benefit. But for me, it doesn't seem very expensive. It's a nice safeguard. And, taking one every other day or one every day during, cold and flu season, there's very low risk, and it's only going to help make sure that your status is good should you be faced with an immune challenge.
So vitamin D, definitely for me. You do vitamin D, or do you do vitamin D? I'm curious. So since you shared that you're taking zinc, what else do you take, Anthony? I know you eat a super healthy diet, but are there other supplements that you take with just immunity in mind?
You do not want to see my supplement covered. It would overwhelm even professionals.
All right. Do not overwhelm us. Please do not. Give me one more. How about throw one more my way? Are you doing vitamin D? Because you live in
California.
California.
You got to do. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you live in California. It's just, unfortunately for me, I work indoors. I have very fair skin, so I should be very good at producing vitamin D. Unfortunately, I'm usually dressed head to toe in clothes.
Up. Yeah.
So I take 5,000 IU, but I do that generally every other day or two because vitamin D in your body, it circulates for almost a month, about 25 days. So, taking 5,000 every other day is pretty much like you're doing 2,000 every day.
Sure.
So it's more or less similar. And I think, honestly, most everybody would likely benefit just as a safeguard to ensure good vitamin D status, because one, inadequacy and deficiency is very prevalent. And it has to do a lot with our lifestyle, not so much our diet. And you're just not going to get enough from the diet. I don't know anyone that's naturally consuming 2,000 IUs through their diet unless they're eating some of those things like the fatty fish and cod liver oil, or literally eating liver, which I don't have a lot of that in my diet.
Oh my gosh! Can I tell you that I had liver the other day, and I love liver. I was making chicken soup, and which we should probably talk about, but I was making chicken soup, and you pull everything out of the inside of the chicken, you get the whole chicken, and there was a liver in there, and I just sauteed it up with some onion, and I had liver and onion, and it's super rich. I shared it with Simon, so it's like of 2 bites each, and it's like a memory food because I grew up eating food. My mother loves liver and onion. But anyway, I digress. I don't know how.
That's a great. Liver is a great source of vitamins A, D, various minerals. So, think about a quote unquote immune superfood. Liver might be it. Unfortunately, I just don't think it's it's very popular with most people.
It's not a common food. No, it's not. It's not popular, although I will say my mother does love it. So give me one more supplement that you're taking with immunity in mind.
So again, I like to take a lot. I like to cover my basics before I get to some of the other stuff. And I take a lot of other stuff. But, right now I am taking vitamin C. I am someone that I would imagine gets a lot of vitamin C through their diet. I eat lots of bell peppers. I eat lots of kiwis and citrus fruits, things that are typically good sources of vitamin C. So generally, I don't often supplement with vitamin C except during cold and flu season. The Linus Pauling Institute, they recommend 400 milligrams a day, which is well above standard intake recommendation levels. So right now I'm taking just our product. We have a 500 milligram one. So I take that every day or two just to augment my diet, to make sure that my system is saturated with it. So to say, my immune cells would be saturated. And again, there's not much risk to taking this amount. So I can afford it. I have access to it. I like to just make sure I have enough during this time. So that's just another very basic one, satisfying your basic nutrient requirements.
I'm thinking back to Nicole's question about the elderberry and the mushroom. And I feel like for Nicole, focusing more on vitamin D, zinc, and vitamin C might be the way to go. And then during those high risk times of year, which maybe would be now, maybe, do the elderberry and the mushroom. It can't hurt, but focusing more on those evidence-based nutrients that, there's a lot of good research behind them. So I think that would probably be a simple way to go. And these are not strange, nutrient supplements. You can find them everywhere.
Right. Exactly.
Anything else? Any other little superstar supplement that you're taking that you think people might want to consider?
Well, again, if we go back to the theme of this whole thing is it's nice to see people paying so much more attention to their nutrition, but I would just really want to emphasize to people that, now it's great that you're doing it, but you need to do it all the time. Some people are suggesting this viral pandemic is really a dress rehearsal potentially for a future one that could be worse. And really, if you're going to walk away learning something from this experience, is that we weren't really well prepared, right? And our response was fumbled. Well, let's be prepared next time. And to be prepared, you want to start eating better. And if you know that you might not be getting enough certain essential micronutrients like your zinc or vitamin D or vitamin C, we'll start a strategic supplementation to help fill those gaps in your diet to make sure that your body is good to go when faced with a challenge. And then you could start thinking about, like you said, adding some of these things like elderberry, or I take beta glucans right now. But again, that's going to help after I'm meeting my vitamin D requirements, after I'm making sure my body has enough zinc, right? I don't put those other ones first. So I take vitamin D throughout the year. I take zinc throughout the year. I take probiotics throughout the year. These are things that, again, right now, everybody's focused on immune function, but all these vitamins and minerals, and they're important for many, many aspects of health and nutrition. And in fact, having an adequate status, it does a lot more than just compromise immune function. And I know that's a much more than we can talk about on this podcast, but in reality, Americans aren't getting enough of these nutrients naturally from their diet. Vitamins A, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, calcium, magnesium, iron, right? All these things, which they're important to immune function, but they're important to the function of your body and your metabolism. And so if we know we're not getting enough through the diet, sometimes a supplement can help. And I think strategic supplementation is the way to go. I don't think, there's any magic bullets out there that will make you avoid getting sick. But remember, we're exposed to viruses, unfriendly bacteria, and various other things that would insult and challenge our immune system all the time, right?
Right, every day, all day.
Exactly. But we're not getting sick every day, all day. Some people are, but most of us aren't. And that's because our immune system keeps it in check. So you want to keep making sure that your immune system and the rest of the cells in your body has the essential fuels that it needs. And these micronutrients are essential fuels, right? Almost every cell in your body has a vitamin D receptor. So yes, it's important for bone health, but it's important for immune health. It's important for health of so many aspects of your body that to think about it only in the context of bone and calcium is just too narrow. And so I love that everyone's paying attention to their nutrition now to support their immunity, but support your overall health and longevity by ensuring that your body's getting adequate micronutrients.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've got children who are napping right now. You've got a baby and your little boy. How old's your little boy now?
My little boy's 2 years old. So I got a 2-year-old and my daughter just turned 3 months.
So you are in the trenches. My gosh.
Oh, yes.
So you better get some sleep, my friend.
Well, I need my zinc and vitamin D and vitamin C and all these things too, because, I'll tell you, my sleep hasn't been the best, and it's not necessarily because, my immune system's compromised, but it's these kiddos keeping us up. And
Well, I will admit to you and my podcast listeners that this morning I got woken up at 6 a.m. because my crazy son Simon went out with the wetsuit to go surfing, believe it or not. And he's home from college, and this is what he's doing, right? He's surfing. I'm like, should you not be doing homework? Anyway, so he went out, I fell back to sleep, and I did not wake up till after 9 o'clock. And I don't think I've slept that late in years. So that's kind of bad, but I guess I needed it. And we know it's good for our immune system. So I'm going to pat myself on the back that I slept till 9 o'clock today.
Well, hey, I would say, is it bad or oh so good? If I have the opportunity to sleep in, I am going to jump at that opportunity.
I know you need to. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for putting all this in perspective. It really helps me. And I will tell you personally, I'm going to add zinc to my list of supplementation. I'm going to go for that. I think that's a good one. I'm going to do it. And yeah, so hopefully I can find that at the store, because I know people are buying zinc like crazy, but I think that's a good one. So thanks for that.
Well, happy to help.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
And for all of my listeners, thank you for tuning in today. I hope we shared some information that might change your life for the better. I certainly learned a lot of new information. If you love the show, post a review on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, be well, and thanks for listening to Liz's Healthy Table.